Hey everybody, thanks for joining today. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about how to be an advanced Gulftree user so you can really be a powerhouse when it comes to making sure it's giving you everything you need. First, I want to tell you a little bit about where we're headed. We're going to touch in on tool development and how that helps you better understand the application of Gulftree. Then we'll go over some tips and tricks to help you start strong. We'll cover some common trip ups and what you can do. And then at the same time, we'll be going over examples. So you'll see a trip up and example, trip up and example. So first, let's talk a little bit about understanding tool development. Tools are only as sophisticated as the science that's out there. So unfortunately, we don't necessarily have tools that can do everything you need them to do. And so understanding where the science is at will help you understand what kind of tools may be out there. Tools related to this face limitations, such as computing power. We don't have unlimited ability to process things. And also there's still a lot of difficulty combining hazards or different factors. So maybe you can find a tool that talks about storm surge and the way it will look in the future, but not necessarily something that talks about high tide flooding and how that'll look in the future all in one tool. Additionally, research in some areas are slower to build tools for a variety of reasons. For example, the economic impacts from climate change. This is a really specific and also a newly growing field, so there aren't a lot of generic or broad tools, easy to use tools out there for economic impacts. Usually they're very focused tools on different kinds of studies that have happened in a specific area or region. Same thing for health impacts and climate. This is a growing area and there are more tools in Gulftree that touch on this, but not a lot. And then finally, research in some areas are quick to build tools. So there are lots of things out there for changes in, say, sea level, lots of different viewers, and same thing for habitat changes. I think there's 3 or 4 different models just for marshes alone. And so understanding if you have a lot of options, that'll help you know if you need to narrow a little more at the beginning of using Gulftree, or if there's not a lot of options for a subject area you're looking at, stay broad, stay big, and then zoom in if you need to. So how do you do that? How do you start strong? Like I said, start with the minimum filters needed. Use your understanding of the current science on sort of assessing, do you need a lot of filters or not so many filters? Because remember, you can always go back and add filters later. So really just use the bare minimum of filters that you need to help narrow in. Another is using that change top filters to refine the big picture. And so if you go here, you've matched with 5 tools. If you want to narrow down on some of that big picture, you go over here to change top filters. You can also use the change more filters to narrow in on some of those specifics of how the tool itself works. So again, same page. If you go over here to change more filters, you can see that you click there and that'll help you have resources to narrow in on how you want to use the tool. Finally, filters are based on outputs, what the tool provides, not what goes into the tool. So for this example here, say you want to understand what subsidence looks like in the future moving forward, if there are projections for that, then you would click subsidence. But if you wanted to make sure that a tool that was looking at future sea level rise rates included subsidence, you would not click on subsidence because that's an input, not an output of the tool. So I hope that makes sense. Same thing for like erosion, right? If you want to see the rates of erosion and the projections of that into the future, click erosion. But if you want to make sure that your model of future sea level projections considers how the shoreline might erode, you do not want to click on erosion because that's an input, not an output. So now we're going to talk about common trip ups that lead to poor matches that aren't really what you're looking for or no matches at all. The first thing we're going to talk about is asking too much from one tool. So, like I said, these tools are only as sophisticated as the current science that we have, and sometimes people will ask one tool to do too many things. And so you can break it down into component parts, like I want you to look at social vulnerability, and then I want you to look at flood risk. And then what you can do is take those different outputs and combine them into your own GIS or mapping software, or if you're doing some kind of vulnerability assessment in another way, you can combine them that way. But thinking about the very sort of base components of what you're analyzing and looking at those individually if you're not getting matches when you try and combine them all together. So to give you an example of what that looks like, we're going to go to Gulftree. And so you can see here, I'm just going to walk you through an example. We're going to do guide my search, which is the entry point. Say that you're thinking about both vulnerabilities, identifying vulnerabilities, and understanding adaptation planning. And that you work for the DOT and you're helping out in Jackson County, Mississippi. So you're really trying to look at the built environment and you're worried about transportation. And then you're also thinking about specifically nuisance flooding and transportation and storm surge and transportation. So now we're down to tools. We've got 8 matches. All right. And so we're just getting started here. We're just kind of humping them out, but we're doing it over here in Jackson County. And so since we're just helping out, we want it to be low effort and free. And you can already see it's gone to relevant matches, so no more exact matches. All right, so let's go see what they've got. All right, so there's some relevant matches here. So it looks like it covers the things we want, but it doesn't do them for free, and it doesn't do them for low effort. You can see here lots of different options. So let's try that trick of breaking it down. So we go to change top filters, remember this is kind of the big picture thing. And let's look at our flooding in 2 separate ways. First, let's look at nuisance flooding. Now we have 2 tool matches, so we can go over here to view tool matches. And you see here we've got the Surging Seas Risk Finder and the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer. And we go in here to the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer and we see that it shows us exactly what we're looking for. It looks at future high tide, so we understand where nuisance flooding may be. So now that we know where high tide vulnerabilities may be and what that might mean for adaptation planning, we can go back here and we can look at storm surge and transportation and get rid of nuisance flooding. And now we have 1 exact match, the Easler-Ingom storm surge. This tool shows us future storm surge under different sea level rise conditions. So now we've been able to look at both future storm surge and look at future nuisance flooding. We just weren't able to look at both together. So another common trip up are multiples. And this isn't like an official formal name or anything. This is just something Michaela and I made up. But what multiples are is that there are some filters that appear multiple times in Gulftree, but you'll find them in different places because they have different contexts. And so you just need to think critically about, okay, is this larger category that I'm looking at where I would expect to find this particular filter? And we actually have a resource to help. For those of you who are watching online or following along, there's a resource that's linked in the video description that takes you to a suite of resources. So you're looking specifically for the Gulftree definition quick sheet. And if you go to page 4, you'll see some asterisks there. And what that means is that this particular filter appears multiple times within Gulftree, but you might find it in different places. So now that you know how to figure out which ones are multiples, I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of where you might see those and what that might mean within Gulftree. So I'm going to walk you through an example of what I mean by multiples. So in this scenario, we're pretending that we're a new hire for sustainability in Dixie County and that we're supposed to understand our carbon storage options. So if you go to filtered search, and then because you've been doing this a while, you've been using Gulftree for a while is what we're pretending. So you know you're in Florida and you're in Dixie County and that you're really focused on adaptation planning. And like I said, we're focused on carbon emissions. We want a low level of effort and free cost. So now we've got down to 6 tool matches, but like I said, we're really interested in carbon storage specifically. And since you're a power user, you know there's a couple different options. So if you go to ecosystems, there's carbon storage. And that gives you 3 tool matches. So you go to view the tool matches and you see there's Pine Map, which looks at tools for foresters to see how pine trees interact with changing climate. Then there's Comet Farm, which looks at emissions from farms and other types of agriculture, which is important to know. And then Land Carbon. So you use this to assess data around carbon stocks and fluxes in the US. So those all seem useful, but because you're a power user, you know to go back and check out what happens if you go to planning and land use, which is a city employee is more in line, or as a county employee is more in line with what you're looking for. You see there's 4 tool matches instead of 3. So if you come here, you see that in addition to the 3 we already saw, there's also this BenMap CE, so the Benefits Mapping and Analysis Program. And this looks at economic costs and benefits of clean energy policies which is a great thing to know if you're talking about options for the county to take, and this could really help give you some understanding of where to prioritize. And so from a multiples perspective, if you had looked at just the ecosystem filter on carbon storage and not looked at the planning and land use filter for carbon storage, you would have gotten different things because you're coming at it from a different perspective. So multiples, you know how to find them now. You go to that definition sheet, and the way you think about them is about context. If you're working for a county, planning and land use might make more sense than, say, if you were just focused on ecosystem services. So now we're going to go to another common trip up, using too many filters. So many of our filters use AND logic, meaning when you select two things, you're looking for a tool that does both of them. OR logic means you're just looking for a tool that can do one or the other of the things you selected. So just to break it down for you, pretending each of these blue circles is a tool, and then each of these different colored shapes inside are different attributes. Say you want attributes like red triangle, orange triangle, and green square. If you use AND logic when looking through these tools, you'll definitely get this first blue tool because it has all three of those things. It's got a red triangle, an orange triangle, and a green square. But none of these other tools have all three of those things. So you'd only get one tool back using AND logic. If you used OR logic, meaning any of these three would be sufficient, you would get this tool, and this tool, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. Not that last one. So given that the purpose of Gulftree is to narrow tools down, we apply an AND logic to help people really specifically get at a tool that does what they need. So if you're not getting matches or you're not getting the right matches, try backing off some of those filter selections. If you want to check and see if a specific type of filter you're using is AND or OR, we have these the question logic quick reference sheets. This is another one of those resources I talked about. You can see it in the text below, or you can go to the resource page. And so what you can see here is the guided search. It walks you through the different types of questions. It shows you that the filter is a checkbox type or a hierarchical checkbox, which means there's other boxes underneath it, and then it is an AND filter. Most of our filters, when you're getting into the nitty-gritty of what to cover, are AND filters. Another thing that happens commonly to people is using filters that have very few matches. And so one way, if you're just, these other things haven't worked, right? Like it's not a multiple and you don't have very many filters selected, and you also are breaking it into component parts, you might just check each filter independently to see how many tools alone get matched with just that one filter. So now I'm going to give you some examples of what those filters may look like that have sort of low matches. So if we go into filtered search and see there's nothing selected right now. So let's take a look at, say, facilitating recovery and rebuilding. Just that tool by itself brought us down to 4 matches. So this is an indication when there's only 4 that you may not want to select any other filters. Other examples include things like carbon emissions, so just the theme alone automatically brings us down to less than 20. That's another really low number if you only have one filter selected. And for comparison, let's look at, say, identifying vulnerabilities. That only gets us to 68. So that's more on par with something that has lots of options versus less than 20. Another one, if you look at changes in air quality, again, there's only 12 of those. And if you go into health, which we talked about at the beginning, how there's just not a lot of options, say you look at air quality. Now there's only 10. So there's 11 or 12 tools that deal with changes in air quality, but only 10 of them deal specifically with health and air quality. This is also another example of something that could be considered a multiple. Under health, we also have things like diseases. Only 5 tools deal specifically with disease, and that's before anything else has been selected. So again, you might just want to go check those out first. And then another area where we have pretty light stuff is economics. So if you look at ecosystem services valuation, there's only 10. And then if you look at general economics, it's only 16. So again, just not a lot of options there. So in summary, when you're getting no or very few matches, remember to try component issues. Instead of trying to look for multiple things at once, like two different types of flooding at once, maybe go look at each one at a time. Don't forget to check for multiples where we have different filters that sound very similar or exactly the same, but they mean very different things depending on the context. Don't have too many and filters selected. You can always go back and add more later. So start with the bare minimum and then work your way up if you don't have things narrowed down enough. And then finally, if you keep running into roadblocks, even when you don't have that many things selected, maybe one of your individual filters is already super narrowing, like the one that only had 4 options or the one that only had 10 options all by itself. Thanks again. If y'all have any questions, you know how to reach out to us at info@gulftree.org, and I appreciate y'all listening.